deathmatch wrestling. Like, I don't, I mean, I think it probably still exists if there is no Sabu, but I'm not sure. Because I think that Mick Foley probably was the guy, but Sabu was probably the other guy that really inspired that generation of people who grew up, with the idea that I can just destroy my body and get a pop and make a name and bleed and all that. And is that a good thing? It's another form of wrestling. It's not my favorite form of wrestling by any means, but it exists. It's all over the place on the indie scene. And, the barbed wire and everything like that, like there were barbed wire matches, obviously, long before Sabu. And there was, but he was one of the guys that those guys grew up on. So it's an interesting, the Sabu Hall of Fame discussion is going to be maybe, some of the most interesting, come the fall during Hall of Fame season, I think. But, it's like the whole, the punishment and the painkillers and all that. And, is that a good thing? Is the people getting a great match where people are brawling and they know there's no rules, wanting tables for no reason other than they just want to tell you we want tables? Is that a good thing? And I find it a bad thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's what the people want. And it's not like wrestling is not drawing people, and it's not like, it's not like the WWE fans don't do it. They probably do it more than anyone, but
they do it when it doesn't even make sense.
I know. Well, that's the legacy that was left, is that it doesn't have to make sense. We just want to see people go through tables. And, obviously, he wasn't the only one. He was the predecessor. It was, the TLC matches were a big deal. And then just everyone did it. Foley, obviously preceded that too. It's just, I think ECW was the catalyst, and he was the catalyst of ECW doing it. So it's kind of like it comes from him, even though people will go, there are people that use tables, and there weren't a lot of people who broke tables before Sabu. There were people who did, but but Sabu was certainly the one who popularized it first.
We talked about it when we did that quick show when you were in Hawaii, which is ECW has to kind of stand out in a different way, in an alternative way. And that is one of the ways that they were able to do so, different from WCW, different from WWF. But today, like it's kind of, I don't know. WWF or WWE doesn't have to stand out by doing tables or.
But the fans want it. The fans, that's what happened. My gut, knowing the taste of Paul Levesque and what he likes, is I don't even think that he would necessarily want it, but I think that it's the deal of, hey, we're presenting a little bit of everything, and the fans want it. And if we don't do it, that's a real disadvantage, in the battle with AEW. Because if they do it and we don't, that's an advantage for them. So we got to do it. And I'm not saying and the fans ask for it. And, if the fans keep asking for it, plus it's easy. Now it's just part of the routine. The heel puts the table back, the table back under the ring. Boo, the babyface takes the table out, big pop. It's easy shit to get a reaction. So, that's also part of the game too. But he was the guy, who he did start that. He did help popularize the deathmatch movement, even though I think the deathmatch movement happens because of Onita either way. And, Onita was the predecessor for ECW. Heyman is looking for something different, something crazy. And unlike everyone in the United States who was clueless about Japan, other than the wrestlers themselves that actually worked in Japan, and most of them worked All Japan and New Japan, which were doing a different style, Heyman knew about Onita. And all that stuff. So for Heyman, and the people of Heyman's generation, when they saw the, Onita Terry Funk match, it was kind of like, whoa, this is something totally new. And this is something that we could do. And then saw the crowds Onita was drawing. It kind of was like, that's what spawned that direction, I think, for ECW. And then he took other elements, obviously, like really geared towards this certain select group of guys in their 20s who like to drink and you know, want to get home on a Friday night at 2 a.m. and watch something crazy when they're blasted, and want to just go to the arena and, you know, be really misogynistic. I mean, he built a whole niche company around that, and his niche company became so influential in the future of wrestling because he built a passionate audience. And then WCW, WWF at the time, they were trying to go like, you know, they're in a war themselves. We got to copy this. We got to get these guys and all this, but they didn't really know how to do it because it was something that they didn't really want to do, but they felt that they had to do. And then you had the top guys in the company, you know, in both companies who they didn't want to do that shit. I mean, some of them did, but most of them didn't. They didn't want to be part of it. They wanted the nice, easy, especially the WCW guys that were on top. They wanted nice, easy, you know, let's just do our promos and let's have very easy matches. And, you know, we'll let the guys we'll let Chris Benoit and those guys, right, do the really great wrestling matches. Just keep them away from us, you know, because we don't want that to be. And then talk about, well, there's a difference between main event style and prelim style, and we're doing main event style, and all those guys don't know how to do main event style, so we can't wrestle them. You know, that whole, and it's funny because today's main event style is exactly the style that those guys said wasn't main event style. So it's just, you know, I mean, it's just a lot to look back on in a lot of different ways. But he was a very, very influential guy.
So your story that you mentioned in the Observer today, you wrote a few paragraphs, but you have a bigger one that you'll write hopefully in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, it definitely won't be this coming week because there's too many shows with the AEW pay-per-view and Saturday Night Main Event and the NXT and Super Juniors and everything. So I'm not even going to attempt to do it this week, but maybe the week after, or the week after that, because there is a really big story to write, and some people have written it, but I definitely have a different tact than any of the stories I've read. You know, it's not just he went here and he did this. I mean, the Sabu thing is, there's a lot to think about. Plus, that whole last match story, I know it was a big deal while I was gone. There's a lot more to it than that. I mean, you know, it's like everyone's kind of covering their ass in some ways, and there's questions. And, you know, I was really interested. I saw the Rob Van Dam podcast where he's kind of, you know, talking about it in his way. And it's like there's that the Van Dam mentality is basically like, look, you know, they're living on pain management. They busted their bodies up real bad.
Yeah.
Is it a crime to be able to get through your life pain-free by using painkillers or just being absolutely horribly hurt and miserable? You know, but other people look at their nose, oh, these guys are all junkies. And it's both. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously some guys, you know, a lot of guys, especially older generation guys, right, that would do the pain meds, but they would also do it to get high, and they were doing it even when they weren't wrestling. I mean, one of the reasons, this is a funny one, I was thinking about, because, you know, the schedule's so easy now, and we're not, you know, easy as compared to the past. It's not an easy schedule. It's not an easy life flying, you know, even just once every single week, you know, flying all over the place. But certainly a lot easier than doing 5-6 matches a week, or even 4 as they did, you know, years ago. But they were doing 5 and 6 and 7, you know, in other eras. And one of the things in the 90s that, and I remember this from WWF, from people on top in WWF, not the wrestlers, but the management, was this idea that more of our guys are having problems and getting messed up when we give them time off, because at least with wrestling, you know, yeah, they have to do it, but they have to be able to perform or they'll lose their jobs. Unlike in the 80s where you didn't even have to be able to perform. But the thing was, on their rec time, they just go crazy, you know, with that, and abuse it and things like that. So there was actually the argument that ended up being false, as you can tell by today's wrestlers, that a lesser schedule would actually make the painkiller issues worse, because those guys would use it for recreational reasons, because they have so much free time, and that's what they do in their free time, is get loaded. So it's a really, you know, and again, this is also a different generation of wrestlers, but it is very interesting how, these mentalities over time, switched, and the business is such a different business and a much, much better business, even though, some people will live with nostalgia of how things were better then. They certainly weren't better for the talent then. It was much, much harder for the talent. And I mean, there's certain things, if you're a fan of, if you're a fan who like to go to live wrestling once a month or once a week, I mean, obviously it was better then, if that was your big social thing. I get that. That's what I grew up on. So, and you can't do that. You can't do that today, but my God, look at the access. I can push my computer and, watch wrestling from anywhere and, any style, you know what I mean? Like if you're out there complaining about, oh, I don't like this wrestling, man, there's 40 different kinds of wrestling. If you can't find one to like, I mean, that's on you.
The WrestleMania story that came out yesterday, they are moving WrestleMania out of New Orleans, and I guess the betting favorite is Las Vegas, but it hasn't technically been made official.
Yeah, they haven't made it official, but they booked 2 dates at Allegiant Stadium, but they got some problems, because I guess there's a concert there that would be in the middle of the setup time. And, when they were working this out, it's like they went to figured, there's a couple of issues around town of places that they want, including the convention center. And, we'll just move people out. And those people had signed contracts with those buildings to have stuff on that weekend of the 18th and 19th. So the plan is to move it back to the 18th and 19th, a week back from the weekend in New Orleans. Because that's the weekend Vegas wants it, because that was the weekend that they had it this time. It's not Easter weekend, though. Easter is earlier this time.
Yeah.
But I guess they just felt that weekend worked, and everyone in Vegas made a lot of money with all the tourists. The question is, there's so many questions in this, and one is, because Vegas is hurting. That's which is actually the part of this story that no one's talking about is Vegas is hurting, and also that Vegas did so well that weekend with all those tourists. The thing that's really hurting Vegas is that people from foreign countries are not coming, and we even talked about this at Mania, that it felt like even though Mania sold out both shows and there was a lot of people in town, it just felt like most of the people were from the United States. Like you didn't have, I just remember Mania meeting people from, especially Europe, South America, the Far East. Everywhere. And this year it was mostly different states. It was different. And for Vegas, they really rely heavily on people coming from foreign countries, and